Hello and welcome everyone to this video. NMAT 2023 notification is out and the paper dates are out. The form filling has started and you must fill the form. Now in this video what we'll be looking at is the pattern of NMAT 2023 that we are expecting, test taking strategy that one should follow when they are writing the paper, when they are preparing for this exam, and the previous year's cutoff. So let's get on and let's get started with this video. So if you look at the test pattern, there will be three sections on this: language skills that will have 28 minutes and 36 questions. The range of score will be from 12 to 120, and that stays as the range of score for all of the three sections. Logical reasoning will be for 40 minutes and the number of questions will be 36. Quantitative skills will be for 52 minutes and the number of questions will be 36. All in all, you are looking at a 2 hours paper and the number of questions being 108. We need to also pay attention to the number of questions being same for each of the three sections. Implies that they want to test all of the three capabilities within a student equally with an equal weightage. So that's the reason of keeping all of the questions the same. Now let's go through some of the salient features of this particular paper. This paper happens to be an adaptive paper. We need to understand the meaning of adaptive paper, and for this we have made a separate video as to what do we mean by an adaptive paper and what can be a student's time management strategy when they are looking at an adaptive paper. So I would attach the link of that video in the description of this video. Please go and have a look at that particular video as well. Now, as far as adaptive test is concerned, just to give you a brief of that, your answer to a particular question determines the following question. So if you have got the present question on your screen as a correct answer, then the next question happens to be a difficult question and will have a higher weightage towards your actual score. So that's how the adaptive paper works. Once you've submitted an answer to a particular question, you cannot go back and cannot really change that answer. So be very careful. Also, we need to understand that if a question that you have left unattempted, it will be considered equivalent to a wrong answer. That means it should not happen that you have attempted only out of, let's say, 36 questions on language skills. Let's say you are saying I'm at question number 25 when I'm closing on to the paper. Then the next nine questions will be considered as incorrect answers for you and you will be penalized for that. So you have to pace yourself really well on this paper in order to ensure that you are looking at every single question. Now, in that bid to do that, let's say suppose you are stuck with a difficult question, you don't know what will be the answer to this. It's advisable to mark an answer and move on because the time limit available on each of these sections is very less. And you don't really have that kind of a time to spend 5 minutes on a particular question. So please ensure that a 1 or a 2 odd flukes here and there are absolutely fine on this paper. Don't spend too much of a time on any set of questions which are available to you. The second important thing is you can choose the order or the sequence of the test that you want your sections to appear for you. So if you want your quantitative skills sections to be the first section of your paper, it is quite possible. They will give you all the orders possible at the beginning of the paper, and you will have to choose which order do you want your sections to appear. Once you've chosen that, you cannot really change it midway between the paper. Now, the scale scores of the section and the total score will be available to you within 48 hours of this paper. That reduces a lot of anxiety in terms of knowing your score, but that does not mean that you have got the cutoff for the particular paper for this entire exam season. So that for the cutoffs you will have to wait a lot longer, but your scores will be available within 48 hours of you writing the paper. Right? Now, the next part of this video, we will be looking at test taking strategy for each of the three sections, and that will be based on the kind of paper that we have come across last year. So I've taken one sample paper of last year. Of course, it is not available in the public domain. That is coming from our experience of writing this paper last year. And the data that I'm going to present you on all the three sections will be from that particular paper. So that does not mean that you are going to get the same kind of paper or same number of questions, but to our mind, it is going to remain almost similar to what we had done on the last year's paper. So it's not going to drastically change. The numbers still gives you a fair idea of how you can expect your paper to be this year as well. So let's have a look at the first section, which is your language skill section. It gives you 28 minutes to do all of the questions present there in this section. And these were the questions that we had come across on the last year's paper. Now, it is very important that you prepare for each of these questions individually and ensure that as and when you get these questions during your paper, you get them right. To my mind, there are a few low-hanging fruits in each of these sections, and those are the questions that one must prepare for during their preparation itself. So for example, preposition to my mind happens to be a topic on which you will have to spend about 2.5 hours of your time in total. And remember those, of course, the concepts that you have read during that 2.5 hours. But the point is that you can very easily get hold of these questions, these 3 questions very, very quickly. So I'm going to give you about a 1.5 minute of time to actually try these questions during the paper. Just look at the question, read it, mark the answer, move on. Don't spend too much of your time. As I told you, that the major challenge on language skills is it is just a 28 minutes paper. That means you would not realize when this paper has gone by. And if you are left with too many questions and you've not attempted those questions will be considered as incorrect questions. So going into the paper, you should realize that you are pacing yourself really well. And that is the reason why I'm giving you for each of these questions, how many minutes should you take. And if at all you feel that you are struggling with that, mark an answer and move on. It's okay to have a fluke on 2-3 questions. There's nothing wrong with that. Your scores are not going to come down like crazy. So don't worry about that. Right? So this is one of those set of questions which I believe are pretty doable, and we can do them very, very quickly. Now comes the next set of questions, which I think you will not need too much of a time, is vocabulary set of questions. Prepare as much as you can as far as vocabulary is concerned, but the point that I'm trying to say is during the paper, you don't need too much of a time to do these questions. Either you know the answers of these questions or you don't know the answer of these questions. You can't do anything great by thinking more on this particular type of question. So about a 2.5 minutes is what I'm going to say that one must take on these 5 vocabulary based questions. Not more than that. There will be students in this paper who would finish off this 5 set of questions in almost 1.5 minute kind of time as well. So in order to compete with those set of people, you will have to ensure that you are really fast at these questions. The other set of questions, which I believe will not take too much of a time, are analogy-based questions. So analogy-based questions are, they'll give you a sample analogy. Let's say, suppose they say paper is to pen. Then they'll ask you, give you 4 options and ask you which of the following options follow the same analogy as the one that was given to you. It is also not going to take too much of a time. So to my mind, about the 3 odd minutes, 3 to 3.5 minutes or 4 minutes on this will be the maximum time that one should take. Now, the other set of time-taking questions on this paper would be your parajumble type of questions. But the good part about parajumble type of questions is they are giving you options for this. So you don't really have to design the exact output, but rather you have to just check the 4 options given to you and which one is the correct order of these statements. These parajumbles are of 3-sentence, 4-sentence parajumbles also, and 5-sentence parajumbles also. So we have to be watchful. Now, if you prepare really well on this particular section as well, then it helps you a lot, because there are small little tips and tricks that can be learned over a period of time. For example, you can figure out, let's say 5 statements are given to you. You can figure out a pair and say, for example, you come down to a pair saying that B will always be after A. So now look at your options, and in the options where B comes before A are the options that you will have to eliminate. And then you will be left with probably 1 or 2 odd options. Just read the entire passage in those particular orders and see which one makes more sense. So if prepared really well, this set of questions can also be tackled in about 4 to 5 odd minutes. Right? Now, grammar. If at all you are really good at grammar, if you can spend a lot of time on grammar like tenses, then subject verb agreement, all of that is something that's going to come very handy as far as this particular paper is concerned. But let's say you are not really great at it, and I think it's perfectly fine to be not great at grammar and still be able to crack this paper. So there are just 5 questions. If you are an average English language reader, you will be able to spot a couple of errors very, very easily. It is challenging to get all 5 of these correct, but yes, for an average student, it can be 2 to 3 questions that you can get absolutely right. And once again, you should not be spending more than about a 3 or a 4 odd minute on this particular set of questions. So if you now look at the time that we have already spent without doing reading comprehension on this paper, would be somewhere about 10 and 14-15 minutes is what we have spent on these 5 set of questions. So about a 14-15 minutes, we will try to finish off these 5 set of questions so that we are left with about 12 to 13 minutes of time to do our last part of the paper, which is your reading comprehension. There will be 3 reading comprehensions of 4 questions each. So total of 12 reading comprehension questions you will encounter on this paper. In all probability, that's what has happened in the previous year's paper also. Now, I very strongly recommend that in this 12 to 13 minutes of time which is left with you after having attempted these 5 set of questions is something that you should at least try to get 2 of the RCs absolutely correct. And one of the RC can be difficult one. You can probably mark the answers and can move on that particular reading comprehension. But keep that on the back of your mind that 2 reading comprehensions are expected to be easy on this paper, and one must get all of those questions actually correct. Also, one need to understand that when you are looking at reading comprehension, a lot of skimming techniques is what you will have to use. You can't go through every single word on the entire reading comprehension, trying to understand every bit of it, trying to spend about 8, 9, 10 minutes on a particular reading comprehension. That kind of time is not available on this paper. So you have to be really fast at skimming through the reading comprehension, going through the questions, and then deciding what can be the answer and quickly move on. We don't really have too much of a time. Typically speaking, I would expect my students to get 8 questions right from this zone at least. Now, please understand you are looking at 36 questions. You can't ignore these 12 questions because this is 1/3 of your paper. So you will have to get a few questions right from reading comprehensions. It's a good idea to try and finish off this part of the language skills paper very, very quickly. Don't spend too much of a time, and then look at about 12 to 13 minutes in your hand in order to do about a 3 reading comprehension set of questions. Now, as I said earlier also that some of these questions you can mark a fluke and move on. There is absolutely nothing wrong in this. What we are looking at is that about this 36 questions, we should try and get about 24, 25 questions correct. And that should help us in order to ensure that we are clearing the sectional cutoff for language skills as a section. And as I mentioned earlier, preposition, prepare for it, get into the paper. Parajumbles, prepare for it, get into the paper. If you can prepare for grammar, it will be absolutely great for you getting into this paper. Analogy and vocabulary has got no limits to it. So you will have to, give it a best shot and be okay to take a few questions from these 2 kind of questions wherein you don't know the meanings of the words, and that's absolutely fine. That's going to happen with every single student out there. So it's not going to make too much of a difference to your scores, right? So let's move on to the next section. We will be looking at the most challenging section according to me on this particular paper, which is logical reasoning. And the time limit is what makes it even more difficult, which is 40 minutes. Now let's have a look at the questions which we encountered last year. Now, these are input-output based questions. That means they'll give you a statement, they'll give you follow it up with 4 steps, and they'll give you an output. They'll tell you that if the input is the first statement, then output will be the last statement according to the 4 steps. Now, these 4 steps will have a logic in it. You have to figure out that logic and apply it to the question that is given to you and come out with the output of that particular statement given to you. Now, there will not be 4 separate questions. There can be one input-output set in which they are asking you 4 questions. So every time they'll change the input and they'll ask you to apply the same logic on this. So there are about 4 input-output questions. That was just one set in last year's paper that we had encountered. Then we had analytical reasoning sets. So analytical reasoning sets are typical logical reasoning sets wherein let's say 10 people are sitting around a circular table. A sits opposite to B, B sits to the right of D, and like that about 8-10 conditions given to you. Based on that, you have to come down to a final arrangement that satisfies all of these conditions. So that's your analytical reasoning type of sets. There can be, of course, different types of sets possible there. There we had encountered 2 sets and each of these sets had got 4 questions. So 8 questions were analytical reasoning questions. Now comes syllogisms, 3 questions. Please understand this thing. You can very nicely prepare for syllogisms and get into this paper. 3 easy questions for you to take and you must get this right. Now, there are about a 5 odd questions present over here. These are single puzzles, single question puzzles that have been given to you. And these type of others questions can be, family tree kind of questions, blood relation kind of questions. Then this can be direction based questions. All of those are the ones that we have kept over here in others category. So we had last year seen about 3 questions. Now, this is the zone that I was talking about, which makes this paper very, very difficult because you have to read a lot in critical reasoning type of questions. Now let's understand last year what kind of critical reasoning questions were present on the paper. So these were the critical reasoning questions present on the last year's paper. Course of action questions were about a 5. So a scenario given to you and they want you to figure out what should be your ideal course of action given in this particular situation. So that's a course of action kind of question that you had encountered. Conclusion based questions. So there is a passage given to you, a small paragraph. What is the kind of conclusion that you can infer out of this passage given to you? Strengthening, weakening, a passage given to you, there is an argument in that passage. Out of the options, they'll ask you that which one strengthens the given argument most, or probably weakens the given argument most, depending upon the question that they have asked you. Assumption and implicit based questions. So all of this is your critical reasoning questions that we had seen last year. The challenge with these critical reasoning questions is that you got to read a lot on this paper. In the logical reasoning section also. So where somebody's very quick reader would find themselves at ease on this paper. I would very strongly recommend that all of these 5 kind of questions you should prepare and get into the paper. If you are getting into the paper without preparing critical reasoning, don't expect yourself to get a good score on this paper, because look at this, out of 36 questions, you are looking at 16 questions coming from critical reasoning. That's something which is about almost a 40% of your paper to be your critical reasoning. So that's very, very significant. Prepare on this. What I expect my students to do is to get about 12 to 13 questions correct from here. All syllogisms, I want my students to get them right. Out of these 12 questions that you are looking at over here, input, output, and analytical reasoning sets, each of these 3 kind of sets would require some amount to be spent there. Very judicious time spending should be there between these 3 sets, and we should try to get 2 of these sets correct out of this. So out of these 12 questions, we are looking at about 8 questions correct for ourselves, 3 over here, 12 to 13 over here is what we are looking at. And out of these 5 questions, if I can get about 3 questions correct, then I'm looking at a paper of about roughly 24-25 questions being correct, and that should be sufficient for you to sail through the cutoff of this particular paper. But make no mistake, to my mind, this is the most challenging section present in this entire paper. Let's move on and let's look at the next section, which is your quantitative skills section, which has got 52 minutes. So I believe this 52 minutes of time makes your life a lot easier on quantitative skills paper. Now, these were the type of questions that we had seen last year. Please understand this has to be an arithmetics heavy paper. Now, what do we mean by arithmetics? Arithmetics is percentages, profit, loss, and discount, simple interest, compound interest, ratios, mixtures, solutions, time and work, time, speed, and distance. All of that put together is your arithmetic set of questions. You're getting 9 questions. Historically speaking, this paper has been an arithmetics heavy paper. So one must prepare before you get into this paper on arithmetics. Another very important thing that I want to bring to your notice is permutations and combination probability has got about 4 questions. Now, a lot of times there are students who are preparing for CAT as an exam and they go on and write NMAT also as an exam. Now, as far as your CAT is concerned, you don't get too many questions from PNC and probability. At least for the last 5-6 years, we have not really seen too many questions. So some of these students do take a strategy wherein they don't prepare for PNC and probability at all for CAT paper. Please don't do the same thing on NMAT as a paper, because you get 4 questions out of 36, which is more than 10% of your paper. You can't afford to take risk on 10% of your paper. Okay, so you will have to prepare for this. Another good part about preparing for permutations and combination is that this paper in general is an easy paper. It's not a very difficult paper. So the questions that you will encounter over here would be very easy questions. And if at all you don't prepare for it, you will have to just leave and move out, and therein others will score. And of course, then you are not getting a great score on the paper. So please prepare for this. One of the sections that I believe that you can skip on this particular paper is geometry. You don't see too many questions coming from triangles, circles, chords, tangents, polygons. All of that seems to be absent on this paper. If at all you wish to prepare something on geometry, prepare on mensuration, because that's where we have of late seen 1 or 2 odd questions from there. But in the last year's paper, this paper that we are referring to, we had no questions on geometry. Now comes another set of questions where you have to separately prepare, will be data sufficiency. Now, data sufficiency is typically, once again, absent on CAT as a paper. You will have to separately prepare for this. Now, when you are done preparing arithmetics, please ensure you have done about a 50-60 odd problems of data sufficiency from arithmetics. Same is the case with the other 3 modules also for algebra, PNC, and number system. Please ensure you are preparing a sufficient number of data sufficiency questions in order to make you comfortable on the paper. Now comes the data interpretation part of it. There were 3 data interpretation sets, 4 questions each, all in all 12 questions. These questions were a bit calculation intensive problem, there is no doubt about it. But to get 2 sets right out of 3 is not going to be very, very challenging for you. So please ensure you prepare really well on data interpretation. Be prepared to take a few difficult set of calculation based problems, but there will not be too much beyond calculation on this data interpretation part. So be ready to do a bit of calculation, and if you're good at that, getting these questions right will not be a challenge. Data sufficiency separately prepared. Arithmetics happens to be the only section that is present all across the history of this paper, and you will find that this is not going anywhere in this year's paper as well. Algebra based question, there was a question based on log, there was a question based on linear equations, quadratic equations, a question based on functions, and similarly probably a question more was there which I'm not able to recollect at this moment. So this is what you are looking at when it comes to quantitative ability section. Prepare individually on each of the kind of questions that we've discussed right now. Now, one thing that we need to understand is that we have been calling this paper as a computer adaptive paper. There is no doubt that this is an adaptive paper, but what students typically do is they compare NMAT as a paper with GMAC as a paper, and they say both are computer adaptive paper, and hence the difficulty level must be equal. No, it is not correct. The difficulty level of GMAT is way higher than in comparison to NMAT as a paper. Please understand this thing, that NMAT as a paper happens to be an easy paper. So even if you are getting a string of questions correct, let's say suppose you have got last 10 questions or 15 questions correct, and now you are expected to go to a difficult question, you might still find that question to be easy. What I'm trying to communicate over here is a lot of students try to judge their adaptive paper by the quality of questions that they are facing. So they believe that if I'm facing difficult set of questions, then I'm getting more score on this. But the problem is that you might be doing everything right on this paper and you might still not come across difficult set of questions because the paper is in general not very difficult. So it's okay during the paper if you feel that I'm getting too many easy questions, you might as well be doing absolutely fine on that paper and still getting those easy questions. So don't try to judge yourself with the standards of GMAT and apply those standards over here. It's not going to work. Don't be panicked during the paper if at all you are seeing easy questions out there. Okay, so let's now get into the third part of this video, which is to look at the previous year's cutoff and understand what kind of scores can we find ourselves to be comfortable with and where we think we might have a bit of trouble. So if I look at the last year's NMAT Mumbai Core MBA and HR programs cutoff, you would realize that 2021, when it was the first year in which it went adaptive, the overall cutoff was 235 and individual section cutoff was 76. Now make no mistake, it is an individual section that you have to clear and also overall score. Now, for example, you might end up getting a score of, let's say, 250 over here as an overall score, but you get, let's say, 72 over here. You are still not getting a call from NMAT Mumbai's MBA and Core MBA and HR program. So you have to clear the individual section cutoff. Now, once, let's say, if you have cleared the individual sectional cutoffs, but you have not been able to clear the overall cutoff, you are still not getting a call for this. So let's say if you got 77 on all of these three sections, but overall you were less than 235, you are still not getting this this call for you, right? So please ensure that you are not banking overly on one section. Prepare equally well for all three sections and then get into this paper. It's not a difficult paper to crack, provided you understand what you are up against, right? So that brings me to the closure of this video. Please do consider subscribing the channel and press the bell icon in order to get the regular updates of all of these videos. Thank you.